Thank you very much, Lillian, for that. And indeed, I think that, the president has made a clarion call for, a social compact, as the president calls it, wherein how does government, civil society, the private sector work together to be able to solve some of these challenges. And when you speak about job seekers, I think, when we just look at the numbers that have been presented by National Treasury of, looking at about 3 million job losses, and if the economic recovery, is not what we hope it would be, then you're looking at anything up to 5 million job losses. And so this then becomes quite pertinent in that regard. So once again, Lillian, thank you very much for that. I'd then like to move on to the next phase or the next stage of the agenda. And it's my privilege and an honor for me to welcome Dr. Graeme Codrington to the call. Some of you might know him. He is an expert around the future world of work and the disruptive forces that are shaping it. He's a globally renowned speaker, a futurist, and a scenario planner. And we certainly look, towards him just to guide us and help shape the conversation in terms of how this initiative fits into how the world of work has changed, not is changing, how it's changed, and also what we foresee in the future. So, Dr. Codrington, over to you, and we certainly look forward to your inputs. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Andile, and thank you, Lillian, for that great opening. What a great initiative to be part of, and it's a real thrill to be just thinking about what we can do for the young people, for all the people of our country, of our continent right now. As Andile said, I've been asked to just have a look at some of the scenarios that face us over the next few years, and I'm not going to be sharing a screen. All of my slides are behind me over here, so if you want to just rearrange your screen so that you can maximize my window and see my slides as I speak, that would be great. I'm also going to have a little bit of interaction in a few minutes time, and I'm going to need you to have your mobile phone or another browser window open, so I'll talk about that in a second. But don't just sit back and relax. We want to be a little bit interactive here as well this morning. As Lillian and Andile have already said, and of course we know, none of us need to be reminded of the impact of COVID on our world at the moment. We're facing a massive crisis in the next few months and years, as all around the world, businesses and individuals in their careers are really going to be hard hit by the economic fallout that I don't think we've really even begun to feel yet. Of course, certain industries have been hit hard already, but I think over the next few months we're going to see just deepening economic impacts as the COVID crisis continues to run. But the context for our conversation today also needs to take into account that we knew and we've been expecting the 2020s to be a deeply disrupted decade. This has always promised to be one of the most disruptive decades of all time. And the issues that we're facing at the moment with employment and job seeking, these are not new issues, right? These are not things that have just emerged in the last few months. So, for example, here's a headline from the UK. This is not just a South African problem, of course, not just an African problem. There's a global problem around employment. And we know that retail is in huge trouble, with the UK shedding 140,000 jobs in retail. Except, have a look at the date. This is not a recent article. This comes as last year the UK newspapers were doing a review of what was happening in the retail sector in the UK last year. So this is before COVID. 140,000 jobs were lost in the UK in the retail sector alone last year. Now, a more local context, I suppose, we could look at the financial services sector. Standard Bank in South Africa, probably the most high profile, but all the other banks did it. Standard Bank just got the headlines. But again, this is from the beginning of last year. as Standard Bank had already got rid of about 600 jobs and then announced a further 1,200 jobs, closing a whole lot of branches. And as I say, that goes on and on. If we look around the world, we see that in every industry. A few years ago, I was speaking at a conference in the UK and shared the stage with Ross McEwen, then the CEO of Royal Bank of Scotland. He asked the audience to guess which was their busiest bank branch. RBS being the largest banking chain across, retail banking chain across the UK. And then you can see here, he gave us the answer that their biggest branch, or their busiest branch at least, was the trains, and especially the train from Reading to London Paddington, a big commuter route from one of the satellite towns that supports the London CBD. And he was saying that they have had to rethink how they look at their banking because of this. Do you have to have staff on hand between 7 and 8 in the morning to do digital interactions with people who are on the banking app? And his answer was, absolutely you do. But then his further answer was to say, well, the good news, at least from the bank's perspective, is that they were using bots and chatbots and AI to be able to handle some of the interactions that they were needing to have, because people were now doing banking 24/7 and not going into physical branches. Bill Gates himself, a number of years ago, looked ahead at what the 2020s was going to be like and made this prediction, which I don't think is a bold prediction at all. The point behind his prediction, as he explained this at a conference at the London School of Economics in 2015, was that we've spent the last 30 years creating building blocks for systems change. So the internet and faster computers and mobile and then cloud. And now we're heading into artificial intelligence and automation and robotics and so on. Moving to, of course, what we call now the fourth industrial revolution, which is not so much a revolution of new technologies. It's a revolution of taking all of the technologies that we've built over the last 20 or 30 years and now starting to put them together to create systems change. And what Bill Gates was saying is that when you bring all of these technologies together and you begin to imagine how they can change the systems, that's when you begin to see real change. Which is quite a thought, right? Because what he's really saying is that we haven't started to see the real change yet. Which is an insane thought if you think about how much the world has changed and how much we rely on all of the technologies around us. If we haven't even yet begun to see what these different technologies can do if we really apply them to systems change, well, then we're in for the wildest ride of all as we look ahead towards the 2020s. Bill gave examples. For example, he talked about driverless cars. Driverless cars bring together about 7 key different technologies, from radar to artificial intelligence and so on. And driverless cars are interesting, right? They're fascinating to see them being developed. They're going to be very interesting to see them in the traffic next to you. Remember traffic? Remember when we used to get into the traffic? But you see a car next to you and the person's sleeping or reading a book or doing their makeup or whatever. I suppose this is South Africa. Most of us see that anyway. But you know, if it's a driverless car next to you, that's cute. It's interesting. You think, wow, okay, I'd love to have a driverless car. The real change isn't a driverless car. The real change is when every car on the road is driverless. So it's not when driverless cars become legal, it's when driverless cars become compulsory. And what happens then is every car can speak to every other car, and all the cars together form a system where the cars can decide on the best traffic flow. MIT has done modeling of this, and they reckon that we will get a 72% improvement in traffic flow. In other words, if it normally took you an hour to get into work in traffic, you could do that now in under 20 minutes. You could do it as if it was a Saturday midnight with no other cars on the road, because the system of driverless cars sorts out any traffic hassles, routes everybody on the best route possible, and gets you to work and home again as fast as possible. There's even better, a 96% improvement in safety, because almost every traffic accident ends up one way or the other being a driver error. And if you can remove driver error from the system, you have a massive improvement in safety. This is why I think we'll actually move quite quickly towards compulsory driverless cars. As soon as they become legal, and then they become normal, then they will become compulsory, because we will want 72% improvement in efficiency. We will want a 96% improvement in safety. We will demand it. Just like we did with seatbelts, just like we did with making sure that the smokers were kicked out of the buildings, just like we're doing at the moment with getting rid of plastic. Yes, there's always people who push back against the change. But when society embraces something and says, this is better for us, things change very, very quickly. And that's what the 2020s was always going to be about. Before COVID hit us, we were already expecting a list as long as your arm of disruptions that were heading us in this direction, right? This is artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, mobility. This is robotics and robotic automation. Then you can look at the political side of things. We were already seeing massive shifts in geopolitics, from Brexit to the American-China trade war, and we were seeing shifts in political power all around the world. Then you can add the climate change and sustainability disruptions on top of that. Did you hear just a few weeks ago that the mayor of Paris, who was re-elected about 3 or 4 weeks ago for another term, one of her major promises is that she wants to make Paris a plastic-free city for the Olympics. That's in 2024. So, talk about the acceleration of some of these disruptions. And that's what I think COVID has done. It's exactly what Lillian was talking to us about in her opening, saying that yes, COVID is itself a disruptor, but what COVID is also doing is accelerating many of the disruptions that were already in play. And what we need to do now, as we find ourselves here in the second half of 2020, is, yes, of course, job number one is to survive the COVID crisis. Job number two is to do what we can to come out the other side of the COVID crisis and ensure that we put our society back together again. But I actually think that the third job is the most important, and that is to recognize all of the disruptions that were already coming our way are still waiting for us. In fact, that's even the wrong way to frame it. These disruptions don't look at us and say, oh, I see you dealing with COVID. I'll go away and I'll come back when you're ready for me. No, the point is that all of these disruptors that are heading us towards the fourth industrial revolution are still coming. They haven't slowed down because of COVID. In fact, many of them have been accelerated. We have and we are living in a moment of accelerated digital transformation. And here I'd like to get you involved. I warned you that I want to be a little bit interactive. So please, won't you just pick up your mobile phone? That's the easiest way to do this. Or you can just go to another browser if you're watching on your laptop computer and just pop in this website address on a browser, ahaslides.com/Microsoft. Or if you've got your mobile phone, there's your QR code. Just aim at your QR code and it will take you to that website. So just get yourself there. Don't do anything yet. Just get yourself to that website, and I'll tell you in a second what I want you to do when you get there. But just if you make sure you start getting towards that website. A few weeks ago, McKinsey did a massive piece of research in which they went to people who are in lockdown, it's all of us, and asked thousands of people, what technologies are you using now during lockdown? Maybe using them for the first time, maybe doing more with these technologies than you've ever done before. And this was the result, right? Now, it's a typical McKinsey graph, so it's a little bit dense. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. These were the categories they gave people. And those of you who are looking, and I can see a few of you are already, who have gone to this site, I'm basically repeating the research with you. So please answer yourself. What technologies do you think are going to last beyond lockdown in your usage, in your home, in your office? The question that McKinsey asked is, what are you using more during lockdown, and what do you think you're going to continue to use after lockdown? And these were all the categories over here. So back to their graph, the vertical axis over here is the new users of the technology. So the higher up you are, the more users there are, new users during lockdown. And then the horizontal axis over here, the further you go across that way, the more likely it was that people were going to continue to use these technologies after lockdown. The biggest one up here is telemedicine. You know, doctors have told us for years, we can't do, you know, FaceTime or Microsoft Teams meetings with our patients. We have to see people in person. Now, during COVID, they are saying to us, don't come to the hospital, don't come to my practice. Let's do this virtually, even by phone. And doctors are finding they can do it, and we are finding we can do it too. And in fact, for some of us, it's actually a good thing. So I see quite a few of you have already answered the question. Please continue to answer. How would you answer the question of what do you think the most significant lasting digital change will be in terms of the technologies that you use? And here, let me show you what I can see here. So we've got a whole lot of people now. We've got 15, 16. Come on, there's more of you on the call here. Interact with me here. Get involved. So we've got 17 people answering already. Let's get a few more as I talk. But a lot of you are saying it's this virtual meetings, right? What we're doing right now. And I agree with you. This is what I do for a living. I travel all over the world. Let me put that in the past tense. I traveled all over the world. I was in 24 countries just last year and spoke at conferences, worked with senior executive teams around the world. And I often said to them, can't we just do a virtual meeting? Why must I fly all the way across the world just for an hour presentation or a 3-hour meeting? And people used to say, no, it will never work. We can't do it. Now we're being forced to do it. Some of us are saying, I'd like to go back to the office, I'd like to go back to face-to-face meetings. But I think there are a lot of meetings and a lot of conferences that we'll discover we can do a better job doing them online. And I think we're going to see a hybrid in the future. Now, you're saying the same with remote education and training, and I agree with you. And that, again, is where we link into today's theme, the Global Skills Initiative, of course, that people now are used to or are getting used to doing learning online. And maybe 2 years ago, the Skills Initiative was as needed as it is now, but it didn't have the urgency and people didn't have the skill set to be able to access it or the desire to access it in this format. And now suddenly we've opened up the opportunity. And it's wonderful that Microsoft and Africa Tikkun and the other partners involved have sensed the moment and are making this not just available, but making it available for free. to make sure that people get access to it. So thank you for participating. If you want to keep going, keep participating, and I'll maybe put up the final results right at the end of the session. The issue that we are facing then is an issue of deep disruptive change. And this is being felt by different people in different ways. I just 2 weeks ago, I had 2 phone calls from friends that just on the same day, it was completely coincidental, but it just highlighted where we find ourselves. One was a yoga instructor, one was a Pilates instructor. The yoga instructor phoned me to just say how tough things were going, and she was coming up to the end of a lease on her yoga studio, and she was telling me how she wasn't planning to renew the lease, how her entire job had collapsed, that she had no clients obviously, and she was really struggling. And it was a really tough phone call. We've all heard those stories. We all know those stories abound in the world at the moment, sadly. A few hours later, just coincidentally, got another phone call from a Pilates instructor, also a South African, and she was just phoning to get some advice because she was being overwhelmed with work. At the beginning of lockdown, she had shifted into a digital space. She recorded a number of Pilates sessions, put them up for free onto the internet, onto YouTube, made them available, contacted all of her clients, let them know that these were available, that they should continue doing their stretching and Pilates. She then opened up a WhatsApp channel where she could interact with clients. And what has happened over the last few months is she has got an increasing number of views of those videos. She's kept putting more up, and she's now beginning to get requests from people to say, can you do a private session for me? Or can you do a live session? Or can you customize something just for me? And those requests are coming from all around the world. She's based in South Africa, but she's now getting requests from the USA, from Europe, from the UK, from Australia. And she's smart enough to not charge in rands when she's doing international work. Just 2 stories, and it's not as easy and as simple as those stories make it sound. But 2 different people with almost the same experience who did 2 different things and now have 2 very different futures ahead of them. And the story, of course, the story behind the Pilates instructor is a story of somebody who at least has some understanding of the 4th Industrial Revolution, some understanding that her future and the future of what she does in her life and her career must be integrally connected with technology and skills that are beyond just the skill set she's got to do the job she's currently doing now. A skill set and also probably a mindset shift that takes her into the digital space. And that mindset shift into the 4th Industrial Revolution is a mindset that understands I've got to get digital skills. Doesn't matter what job or career you do, adding a layer of digital skills onto that is always going to be useful and valuable. The second thing is to realize that, in fact, for some of us, the skill set is the digital. That some of our jobs are never going to be the way that they were. This is where I think this begins to tie in to where we are in the world at the moment. Yes, we're in a COVID crisis, but we would have been in a crisis of some sort anyway, because the 2020s was rushing at us like a freight train anyway. A lot of our jobs were going to be under pressure anyway. And all COVID has done is shone a massive spotlight on stuff I think that was already going to happen. And we needed to see beyond the crisis, or we need to see beyond the crisis to the opportunity that we now have. Of course, we'd prefer to take the opportunity without the crisis, no doubt. But today's young people, and especially the young people of Africa and South Africa, need to get ready for this era that approaches us, this fourth industrial revolution, the 2020s, whatever label you prefer. We are facing automation and disruption of massive magnitude, more than anything we've ever seen in our lifetimes, maybe the greatest decade of disruption the world has ever known. We'll look back and let history make that call. And what we need to do now, as we stand here in the second half of 2020 dealing with this COVID crisis, is to not focus on going back to normal, not trying to desperately power through the COVID crisis and just put things back the way that they were, because the way that they were wasn't fit for purpose anyway. We needed to make a lot of changes, especially here in Africa, in South Africa. We needed, especially with today's young people, to skill them for this digital revolution. There are not enough jobs available. There were never going to be enough jobs available, even without COVID. So this is something we have to do. Not just survive the crisis and get back to normal, but we have to take the opportunity now, almost, if you like, an invitation that COVID gives us to reimagine our future, and especially reimagine the future for our young people. Of course, Microsoft's Skills Initiative is not limited to young people. It's open to anybody who realizes that we're not going back to normal. Even when COVID is over, the economy isn't magically producing jobs for everybody. That now is an opportunity for us to rethink what we see about the future, to reimagine the skill sets that we need to get there. And then, and this for me is one of the most exciting things about this Global Skills Initiative, it's more than just an online set of courses. It's through LinkedIn and GitHub. It connects you into a network of people. This is one of the things that we now have to understand about what COVID is going to do in our workplace. Geography is going to be dead, right? The distance economy that at the moment is physical distancing, social distancing to protect us from COVID. It's actually a distance economy which says many of us are discovering we don't have to go to the office. We don't have to be in the workplace, which means that geography is no longer a factor. Companies will suddenly realize they don't only have to employ people who are within driving distance of the office. They can now employ people anywhere in the world. And that means our mindset shift has to change to say, if I've got the right level of skills, the right level of attitude, if I've got the right level of energy and focus and ability, well, then I can get a job anywhere. If we're in this digital world, if we are fully in the fourth industrial revolution, then honestly, in a hang of a lot of environments, geography is dead, and we suddenly become citizens of the world. This is a huge mindset shift. What I mean by reimagining our world. So Lillian, Andile, it's fantastic to be part of the program this morning, to be part of the launch of this Skills Initiative. Thanks for inviting me. I hope that we understand that this is not merely a response to a COVID crisis. That what we're doing here, what Microsoft is doing, what Africa Tikkun is enabling here, is not only a way to deal with the current crisis. This is actually setting ourselves up for success in the rest of the 2020s and beyond. And what I really hope is that we see a groundswell of support for this initiative. As much as Microsoft is offering, and LinkedIn and GitHub and others are offering some of these services for free. And by the way, when we think of free, we need to realize it isn't actually for free. There's a lot of money that is actually being invested here to make it free by Microsoft. So, I mean, we need to think of this as a massive foreign direct investment in South Africa and Africa, and a wonderful gift to the country. And what we need to do is step up and walk alongside this initiative. Sadly, in South Africa, data we know is not free. In fact, it's anything but free. It's some of the most expensive data in the world. And people are going to need data, and they're going to need computers and time to access these systems. We need to engage with businesses to make sure they don't retrench people without helping them to upskill, and maybe this is a solution they can use. We need to engage ourselves in the public sector to make sure that we don't just give verbal support, but we look at enabling the systems that will make this initiative a success. I'm hugely excited to see what you guys do with this, and to stay in touch with it, and to do what I can from my perspective and our team at Tomorrow Today. And we have a long-standing relationship with Africa Tikkun to see what we can, Andile, to support you in all that you are doing. If you'd like to be in contact with me, chat to me, and just even if you'd like to just share some examples of some of the fourth industrial revolution disruptions that you are seeing, some of the things that are being accelerated by the COVID disruption, I'd love to hear from you and connect. And on my websites over here, you'll be able to find a whole lot of resources, all of them for free, available to help you and your team get through the COVID crisis and reimagine the opportunities on the other side. Andile, thanks again for having me as part of the program this morning. Thank you.
Graeme, wow. As always, you never disappoint. And, each time I listen to you personally, I mean, there's always a couple of things that I take out. So thank you very much. And in fact, and really, for inviting us, or extending the invitation for us to reimagine the world and reimagine our world, and not, still be, residing in hope that we're going to go back to the old and kind of like, just walk through and tolerate the current circumstance that we have. And I think also, I mean, the point that you're raising is a very critical one, Graeme, of so when I spoke about the social compact that the president has called upon in terms of, investments, this is indeed quite a massive investment. And, just to maybe put things into context, I mean, so before I joined Microsoft, I was, doing my own thing, and I was on LinkedIn Premium, and LinkedIn Premium, I think, is about 750 rands, per month, sorry. And therefore that is, I mean, you times that by 12, so it's probably about 8,500. Now, if we're saying that you've got 3 million, folk that are being, built to lose their jobs. Now, one is how many people will have access to 8,500 rand per annum to be able to access these services. And secondly, I mean, when you speak about the investment from Microsoft in terms of foreign direct investment times, 8,500 by 3 million people as an example, then you start doing those numbers, then there's a lot of sales behind it. So thanks for putting putting that into context. So I think, Graeme, I was a bit cheeky, and I wanted to take one or two questions. So if you allow me, just take one or two questions if you don't mind. So there's a question from Nazreen, who says, Andile, it would be interesting to have Graeme's perspective on shifts in education, so the traditional university roots and the role of vocational education, and how this aligns to the labor market mobility in 4IR and future of work.
If we're looking for examples of industries that were due to be disrupted, I gave the example of driverless cars, and I think we'll see a huge disruption in transportation. Gave the example of the medical system, and I think there'll be huge disruptors coming there. Probably the third industry that I go to when I need examples of disruption has been education, especially higher education. I mean, higher education, I think, is very out of touch and out of date. It's a huge generalization. But all around the world, higher education has been largely untouched by the digital revolution. You've still got people going to campuses, sitting in classrooms, not a lot of technology being used. I do quite a lot of work with universities around the world, and I can tell you that university professors are amongst the least agile and least responsive to change of all professions I know. And then, of course, in the last 20 years, you've had a nearly 4,000% increase in costs. Well, at least pricing to students. And I'm not accusing universities of making massive profits, but the cost base has increased out of all proportion to any inflation or other industries, where you would have expected technology to begin reducing some of those costs. So, for me, education has been ripe for innovation and disruption even before COVID, and now you've got this COVID disruption. So I'm actually quite excited to see what COVID will force higher education to do, and I think it will also unlock in many people's minds the concept of learning doesn't only happen in a classroom. And that's going to be great for all of us at every stage of our lives, because none of us should look back and think, 20 years ago when last we went and did a proper university course. We should all be learning, upgrading our skills all the time. So it's a bit of a general answer to a specific question, but I think we're going to see a lot of innovation and disruption in the education sector soon.
No, indeed, and thank you very much for Graeme. I guess your comment there is really posing a question, and I mean we've got colleagues from higher education and training on the call. We've got tertiary institutions like Forte, BET, etc. They're also on the call. We've also got CSIR. So indeed, I mean the challenge that you're posing is one that I think certainly they're taking it up. So Graeme, once again, thank you very much for those words, and very thought-provoking, and certainly I think when we get into the panel discussion a bit later, there'll be a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So as we transition into our keynote address, I must say, Graeme, that there's I come from the Eastern Cape, and so our guest, our keynote speaker, Dr. Ramokgopa, is from Atteridgeville. Now, in the Eastern Cape and also Atteridgeville, the challenge that we face is that anything that you can't expect. Investment to be able to assist the country. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Andile, and good morning to everyone in your eminence. Just to thank you and Lillian for inviting us to be part of this august occasion. Let me make the following point that I thought that I should provide a bit of context in relation to the South African economy, so that there's